the information that I'm using for the webinar we're going to be discussing over the next hour is all taken directly from the Church Windows help files. So everybody should see the screen here for me that I'm working with, and see me like in this case my little highlighter friend. Hello, everybody should see that. Okay, hopefully you see that there. But we're going to be going into help here, because I'm going to show you at least how to find the topics. This was related sort of to the help topics, or the topic that Craig led a couple weeks ago, was how to use help. And so if you go into search under help, and in our keyword location here in the upper left corner, if I put in, say, sub, and I click list topics, we're going to find lots of things about sub that have the keyword sub in it. Like notice here, add sub funds and sub accounts, adding sub accounts for income expenses. All of the material that I'm covering today is going to be taken directly from this. So from these. So if I type in totals, subtotals instead of sub, again, and click list topics, it reveals a couple of subtotals. There's a couple in here. Notice that now when I click on that, the one that this one reveals is on donations. We're not going to be covering that today. No. We're going to be going down to the second one, which is talking about subtotals in accounting. So that's the one I'm going to be using today for our presentation. Okay, so just for folks that are interested in looking at or the material that I am using for the presentation today, that is exactly what I'm going to be using today. Okay, so you don't have to get that now, but you can always, it's there available at your fingertips anytime you open Church Windows, so you can download that and print that anytime you wish. All right, so let's talk about funds, sub-accounts and sub-funds versus subtotals. We're going to go ahead and open our accounting module. And one of the things that we always like to make, or that we want to make really, really clear, there always seems to be a lot of confusion about this, is which one do I use? Well, there are some really big or broad conceptual differences between the purpose of subtotals versus subaccounts and subfunds, okay? And the biggest couple of the biggest differences about those are, let's go ahead and open up our chart of accounts and show this, is, at our chart of accounts itself, any of these accounts that have a plus sign next to them in our chart of accounts in accounting are representative of sub-accounts or sub-funds, as the case may be. And we can have sub-accounts in every type of an account in Church Windows that we want. We're not restricted to just having them, say, in assets or liabilities. We can have sub-accounts and in every type of an account in Church Windows that we wish. And as we continue to scroll down, let me maximize the window here, and as we continue to scroll down, we've got our accounts receivable clients main ledger asset. When I collapse that down, we see our accounts payable liability main ledger account that has our accounts payable vendors. Below that, we've set up a pass-through liability account. And notice here now, even when we collapse those down and we go into our memorial, right down into our funds, we see a great example of a use of sub-funds is memorials. So we have a main memorial fund set up 340-100, and under that, when we click or expand that using the plus sign, we then now see the individual memorial funds below that. And then when we continue to go down even further, we've got one main ledger for income accounts, and then now in our expenses we've got a whole bunch of main ledger expenses with sub-expense accounts listed there. Okay, as opposed to, these are actually accounts, all right, and we're going to come back to more details about that, but as opposed to subtotals, which are means of being able to have us group together for reporting purposes our accounts on our reports. And a good example of where we might be able to see subtotals might be something like our treasurer's report. So if we go to our treasurer's report itself, and let's maybe run that for, let's run that for month September, and we're going to click on our columns tab, and when we click now on print, subtotals are represented by these emboldened totals right below here, like total general fund income or total building fund income, total missions fund because this report really wonderfully displays both an example of subtotals and sub-accounts is on our treasurer's report with our data. You can have a combination of both. In many cases, many churches will, but you really do have to be careful about when you're setting up subtotals versus sub-funds. And again, I'm going to come back to more details on that here in just a little bit. A good example of sub-accounts are when we jump down to our expenses down here, because if you remember that we were in our chart of accounts, we had a lot of our expense accounts set up with main and sub-ledger accounts. Is an example of that would be something up here like at the very top for our senior minister's salary and benefits. So the main ledger account is 510-100, and then we see this, and it does go down into page 2 here, all the way down to 510-120. Senior minister's housing allowance, auto allowance, and then a total, a sub-ledger or main ledger does create a subtotal of its own. We don't need to set up a separate subtotal for sub-accounts. The system subtotals those automatically for us. However, notice that those are not emboldened. They're italicized. That really is an easy and quick and easy and simple way for us to identify the difference between what we've set up as subtotals versus sub-accounts. And notice when we jump down into our associate minister's salary and benefits with those sub-accounts that it too has a italicized total. Then we now have a subtotal set up for both of our pastors, basically both of their ledger accounts, called total pastor salary and benefits. That we've created in our subtotals. Depending on, again, how your chart of accounts is structured and designed, you may need to set up both sub-accounts and subtotals, okay? And then when we continue to scroll down even further in our chart, let me erase our drawings here. I think I went down a little too far here. Let's scroll back up. So here again, we've got even more for basically what we've set up in our chart of accounts is our compensation or payroll. Expense accounts are now set up primarily as our main focus for our sub-accounts. So here we've got music director salary and benefits, music director salary with its subtotal, or its total, because it's a sub-ledger. And then it continues down into more. So generally, again, italicized versus bold are an easy way for us to tell the difference between what we've set up as subtotals versus sub-accounts. So to get back to the concept of the conceptual differences between those two, and this is really, really important for us to wrap our minds around, is when we set up these accounts, like we have our senior pastor's salary and benefits here, these three. There might even be 4. I may have omitted accounts with 0 balances. Oh, I did. Let's maybe add those back in here, and that's going to expand that a little bit. It's going to make the report a little bigger here to bring in all of our accounts. There we go. So now here we've got all 5 of the sub-ledger accounts for our senior minister with their total. Is that really the intention between or behind each of these ledgers with sub-accounts is that we have set them up because from a reporting perspective, we want them to always be reported on collectively together at all times. Whenever we run this treasurer's report, we're going to see all of these accounts. I frequently cannot just choose one of the sub-accounts to report on. Now, that's not entirely true. But in terms of reports like our treasurer's report, fund activity report, those types of reports, those accounts are going to report together always. Okay? That's a really, really important distinction is sub-accounts and ledgers with sub-accounts versus subtotals. Sub-accounts and sub-accounts with main ledger accounts limits us more from a reporting perspective than subtotals. Okay? So in addition to our reporting, one of the other restrictions that we have about sub-accounts, let's go back to now so one is reporting, that the sub-ledgers or the ledgers are always going to report, or the sub-accounts are going to report together always. If we go down to, say, our income or our expense accounts, and we use our senior minister's salary and benefits as an example, notice here when I click on my senior minister's salary expense account over here on the right side, let's get my highlighter friend out and steer some focus over here on the right, the menu called Fund. Notice here that that is gray. I cannot click on that. The reason being is we cannot have accounts, subledger accounts linked to different funds. This is really mostly important for our income and our expense accounts, but notice here I can't click the drop-down menu and change it. Simply what that's telling us is if we have income and expense accounts set up as ledger with subledgers, all of the sub-accounts must be linked to the same fund. We've built that into the program to protect you, but it is an important thing to understand. We get that support call periodically is, hey, I've got these accounts here, these income or expense accounts, and I want to have them linked to, or I want to have one of them linked to a different fund. And if I bring somebody into the chart of accounts and I say, okay, over on the right on the detail tab, halfway down, if you click the drop-down menu called Fund, change it to the fund you're wanting to change it to there. And they go, well, I can't, it's gray. And that's my first clue as a support technician that we're dealing with a subledger account. And so again, notice when we go back to our senior minister's salary and benefits, now the main ledger, the 510-100, the account that I've highlighted over here on the left side, right here, draw my little poorly drawn arrow there. That when we click on that main ledger account over here on the right, I can click the drop down arrow now, and I can say, okay, I want to change my linking of my senior minister's salary and benefits ledger over to a different fund. But it is going to grab every single one of those 5 sub-accounts, and it's going to move those over and all of their subsequent expenses for the year over to that whatever fund I'm changing that linking to. If there are ways for us to work around that, but we're going to come back to that topic here in just a little bit. Okay, so 2 things already that we've learned about how main ledger accounts and sub-accounts affect us or restrict us in some aspects, depends on how you look at it, is one, for reporting. All of our ledgers and subledgers are designed to report together. We want them to always show on reports together as basically a cohesive unit, 1. And 2, in the cases of income and expense accounts, our treasurer's report accounts, essentially, we want all of those ledger accounts must be linked to the same fund. Okay, which is not the case in the cases of subtotals. Okay, now yes, I can't. In cases of my subtotals, as long as I've got separate accounts, they can be manipulated and moved around into my accounts anytime I wish. Okay. Subtotals, I can take any expense and move it into any subtotal I want to, and the same thing is true with my income or any other type of an account. We're going to come back to that here closer to the end of the webinar. Let's go back now and let's talk a little bit about how we deal with and set up accounts, subledger accounts, with main ledgers. There's a lot of ways that we can go ahead and do this. All right, let's close out of our chart of accounts. If we go to Manage Accounts at the very top left of our accounting screen and Accounts Plus Minus, and we can choose any account type that we want. I don't care whether it's an asset or an AR client or a vendor. Well, vendors can't be because they're already subledgers. AR clients can't either. So assets, liabilities, funds, income and expenses. Scratch that. So no accounts payable vendors, no accounts receivable clients. They are already subledgers. But assets, liabilities, funds, income, and expenses can have sub-accounts. So it really doesn't matter. We can pick any one, and I can show you an example of how this works. Is if we click on, say, expenses. Let's expand that window. Down now in the lower left corner, we see all of our existing expense accounts linked to our general fund. I can look at the other expenses linked to the other funds if I wish by simply clicking the drop-down arrow here and choosing another fund. But when we look down here at the expenses themselves on the right side, notice it says right here, sub-accounts. So it's either going to show a 0 if it will permit us to have accounts but there aren't any subledgers, or it will currently show you how many sub-accounts there are. or in the cases of some accounts, because they may have activity throughout the current year, or they're, like in the case of an asset or a fund or a liability, there may have been a beginning balance that we started the year with in those accounts. So those might be examples of why NA may be or not applicable is an option here, as opposed to setting up sub-accounts. Okay. Right here. So here we've got our senior minister's salary and benefits. So if I go, okay, I want to add another sub-ledger account to the senior minister's salary and benefits expenses, I can simply click that little, let me erase my drawing tools here. I can just simply click that little ellipsis or button with 3 dots to the right, and when I click on that, notice up here at the top left, it shows the general operating fund with the main ledger expense account already selected and the sub-ledgers already listed below that. Okay, so simply now I can, click in here, type in the new account name, then enter below that the new, again, the additional or now 6th sub-ledger account for that. Let's call this Senior Minister Books and Pubs. And we're going to name that or number that. We're going to try 110-130. Let's try it. And click Add Account. So notice it's now added a 6th sub-ledger to that ledger. Okay? Automatically. So now I can just click Finished with adding sub-ledgers at the very bottom down here. And then when I click on that, it will take me back to right back to where I was on the previous screen, to my general operating fund. And notice now the number says 6. All right? This is all on the topic for adding sub-accounts for income and expense accounts, again, that I've taken directly from our help file. Okay? These screenshots in there show virtually the same exact thing that I'm covering here. Again, accounts like supply pass-through or musician salary, basically if you see the ellipsis button on the right, the system will permit us to add sub-ledgers. So as we continue to go down, these are the ones at the top, but if we continue to scroll down, we've got lots of expense accounts we could add sub-ledger expense accounts to if we wish. And again, the other ones that say NA are telling us, one, either beginning balance, unlikely for expense accounts. So more than likely that means there's year-to-date or current year activity for those expense accounts. Let's click under income at the top. Works exactly in the same manner. Okay, so we simply see the income accounts. I thought I'd erased my drawing tools, drawings. I'm sorry, folks. So here are sub accounts. Again, NA, implying that telling us that we simply cannot add sub ledgers at this time. Any of those that have 0 with the ellipsis button to the right will allow us to add sub-ledgers. So here if I do special holiday giving, if I click on that, it opens up my special holiday giving expense, allowing me to enter my first sub-ledger income account if I wish. Okay, so we can click back to main funds. Let's go ahead and close out of our accounts, and let's go up to funds this time. Funds are even a little more tricky from the standpoint that we're dealing with income and expense accounts. Okay. Again, we'd seen on our chart of accounts previously that our only fund that we have in our training data or sample data here that we're working with today was our memorial fund. And we can clearly see our memorial fund over here on the right, on the left side. Over here to the right, as we've said before, we see the little ellipsis button with the number of sub-funds. That when we click on that, it brings up all of our separate individual memorials, and we can now click on the enter a new fund name. Let's get that entered correctly. And now notice when we tab down to our account number, it's now asking us to enter, again, a number 3 account. And then when we click Add Account, we've added just a new John Doe Memorial Fund. And we do need to go up to our income and expenses and add income and expense accounts for this sub-fund. Again, that's the primary difference between sub-funds versus sub-accounts is that the income and expense accounts are going to be linked to our sub-funds, not to the main ledger fund, in this case the main memorial fund. And again, another way for us to visually see where and how that works is over here on the right side under our Tree View tab, right up here. Okay. So when we click on the Tree View and we expand our funds, so notice right here, here's our main memorial fund with a minus next to it. Below that we see our John Joseph Memorial, Timothy Anglino, Joy Long Memorial, etc. Each one of those have plus signs next to them that when we click on those, notice now then it reveals another basically grouping with a plus sign next to it that actually reveals each of the income and expense accounts that are linked to these sub-funds. So that's, again, the main difference between sub-accounts and sub-funds is you've got to always keep in mind that when you add the sub-fund itself, you have to remember to add the income sources and the means of expensing money out of it, or income and expenses, to those funds. So we haven't done that for our new John Doe fund. So we can now, actually we're going to right click on that, we're going to choose Edit, we're going to call it John Doe Memorial Fund, and click OK, so just to be consistent for reporting purposes. And so now, without even closing up my window, I can click, right on my setting up sub funds for Memorial Fund. I can go right up to expenses and just click on, or income, and say click on income. And here it says main income accounts for. Under current fund, I can choose Memorial Fund, not missions, Memorial Fund. Then it requires that I choose one of the sub funds, and we're going to choose John Doe Memorial, and we'll enter an expense account called the John Doe Memorial Expense. My typing skills are leaving something to be desired today. And again, what was that? The fund number was 155. And we can go right up to expenses, current fund, choose Memorial, choose our John Doe Memorial Fund. We'll call this, did I name the other one expenses? We'll have to come back and check that. John Doe Memorial Expense. And click Add Account. Whoops, it's already in use. So I did name it. Poor me. So now we can just simply come over to the income account, right click on it, choose Edit, and we'll go, whoops, and we'll just change that to income. Click OK. And we'll even fix our expense account. There we go. So there we go. We've just set up another fund for our Memorial Fund. And again, so when we go back to our funds at the top, and down here we see our Memorial Fund. Over to the right we see 6 now instead of 5. So again, whenever you add a fund, folks, there are very, very, very few exceptions where any fund, I don't care whether it's a main fund, you know what I mean, its own separate fund or a sub-fund, is that you do want to add and set up income and expense accounts for those funds. We've got to have a means of flowing income into it and a means of spending money out of it in virtually all cases. The help topic it's in our help that I was mentioning before about adding sub-funds and sub-accounts talks about adding like a building renovation fund. That's basically adding a new main ledger fund from scratch. And how we do that would be to simply go up to the top here, and we call it Building Renovation Fund. And we tab down. And that one we're going to give the number of maybe 350, 100. And we're going to add account. All right, let's try 60, 100. There we go. So it's now added our new building renovation fund. Notice here, one of the things that I always like to mention is, unlike some of our other funds except the Memorial, or all the others are, we've got the new fund, the main ledger fund, already set up. There is no balance in play here. All right, there are no income and expense accounts to deal with. So this is the perfect time to add sub-funds to this fund. And we're going to go ahead and do that. So now when we click on the little ellipsis next to our building renovation, we're going to call this the sub-fund, the church building reno fund. And we're going to label this one 60-110, add account. And then we're going to call this one the parsonage renovation fund. And we're going to number this one 360-120. Add accounts. Notice here on the tree view on the right, the tree view continues to grow. We've got our building renovation fund with the two sub-funds already listed there. And again, this can continue if I have even more additional sub-funds that are here. And then I can simply go up to my income accounts, choose current fund, scroll down, choose building renovation. It requires that I choose one of my sub-funds. And if my cap locks were not on, that might help. And this one will be 160-110, add account. Go up and choose the parsonage renovation. I think you get the idea here. Renovation expense. And add account. Can literally now go up to expense. Similarly, scrolling down and choosing our building renovation. Call this one church building renovation expense. And we'll number this one 60-110. And we'll choose the parsonage. And 60-120, and add account. Oh, did I do the same thing I did before? I believe I did. All right. So, but in any case, I think you get the idea here that I mean, how long has it taken me to add this new fund itself with the sub funds? Not very long. Very quick, very simple. So there we go. We've just set up one new main fund, in this case our building renovation, with the two sub-funds with subsequent income and expense accounts. It literally can be that easy if you're starting from scratch. All right. This, again, folks, is all in your help topics. It's all here for you to be able to use or access anytime you wish. The system will tell you when you can or cannot do this by simply, again, going back to our like funds in this case, and again looking over on the right for sub funds. The question I'm getting is, we're getting a lot of questions as to about accounts you can make into main ledger accounts after there's activity to it, and that Marla and Maureen are indicating no, and to please confirm no and why. Well, that's true. We get this question a fair amount during support. Here it is mid-year, we've got funds or we've got income and expenses where there's already activity or maybe there's a beginning balance posted to it, and can I make that fund or that account have sub-ledgers or sub-accounts now? Well, as we've sort of discussed here already, is really taking the existing account, like under income, and making adding sub-accounts to it, like for loose offering or general tithes and offerings or any of these others here that say NA. Simply the answer is no. But that doesn't mean, and I train on this a lot, or I teach folks how to do this a lot, is it doesn't mean that we're entirely out of luck. Okay, that's the other thing about accounts and funds, is that we have to keep in mind is, well, it's the one most important thing here is, if a fund or an account has a beginning balance for the year and or current year activity or income and expenses linked to it, we cannot have transactions posted to it. And again, accounts like income and expenses are different though, because we're dealing with linking of income and expenses as well to funds. So funds have to be sort of viewed a little bit differently about that, okay? But again, if you shift your thinking about it, so let's see if I can go back and if we can kind of get one here that we're going to do. Okay, let's say we've got, we're in the mid-year and we're going to, we want to now take our missions fund and we want to set up sub-funds for the various missions that the church supports. Can we do that? Well, right here, over there, it's clearly telling us when I click on that button, it says you cannot add sub-funds to a fund that has income or expense accounts. Okay, makes sense. So what about if I relink my income and expense accounts over to another fund temporarily? That's a great idea. That's certainly possible. But there are definitely other things in play that I have to keep in mind or check on that first. And one of them is, of course, beginning balance. So if I go up to my view now in my chart of accounts, and I go in and I search for my mission fund, and I click the balance tab up there. I started the year with a beginning balance in my mission fund. Simply, even if I were to relink my income and expense accounts for mission over to another fund just for the purpose of trying to set up the sub-ledger accounts or sub-funds, I still wouldn't be able to add or put sub-funds into or below or attached to my main mission fund itself. Okay? But that still doesn't mean you're entirely out of luck. All right, there are certainly creative ways that we can still do or achieve mid-year what we're wanting to do. All right, so technically, while the answer is still no, we can't do this for our main fund, if we shift our thinking, there are ways we can creatively do that. Okay, and the way we can do that simply is how we can do that. I'm sorry, folks, I'll try to slow down. Is that we are going to then create the new main ledger mission fund. As we have just seen that we are going through when we just added our building renovation was as soon as we added that main ledger fund, that was the perfect time for us to go in and add subledgers. So we can now go into our tree view tab over here on the right and we can say add new fund, and we're going to call this main mission fund. I don't have to go through the manage accounts and accounts plus minus up there. And we're going to number this one, how about maybe 330090, and we're going to click OK. So now, if we go up to, say, our manage accounts, accounts plus minus, choose funds, here we now have our main mission fund on the left side here. Notice it says I can add accounts. Okay, so I can go in and add sub-funds for the new main mission fund that I've set up. So probably many of you are asking, well, what about my existing mission fund itself? What do I do with that? Well, it's a good question. We can leave it as is, not the ideal situation, certainly. But we can go in and add it as a subledger to our now new main mission fund. How do you do that, you ask? We're going to close out of our add accounts, and right here at our chart of accounts, down here on the lower, let me pull that up here, scroll up. We are now see our new main mission fund balance, and then right below that our mission fund, our previously existing mission fund. And what we can do with that is click back over under our detail tab here, and notice right here in the upper right we've got the button on the detail tab labeled add to ledger right here. Everybody should see that arrow now. I've steered some focus there moving up to that. So if I click on that, choosing my mission fund balance, not the new main mission fund, but the one existing, the 330,100. If I click add to ledger, it brings up a menu. Let me get rid of my drawings here, called main ledger. And from that drop-down menu, notice it's allowing me to choose my main mission fund balance account. So if I now choose that, hit my tab key and refresh my chart of accounts, notice here on the left side, my main mission fund now has a minus sign, and my existing mission fund balance is now moved as a subledger to that fund. So what I can do now is, after I've added my other various mission projects, my other funds here, I can simply transfer the balance out of this mission sub-fund balance over to those other new funds that I've added, and then rename this one or render it inactive, depending on how I choose to deal with that existing mission fund balance. So even mid-year, there are ways for us to still creatively set up, like in this case, a new fund or a fund with sub-funds. We just may not be able to take or move or to make the existing fund the main fund. I hope that makes sense. And the same is true when dealing with income and expense accounts. So if I scroll down to my income and expenses, like another, how I can just set one up, like a good example of a subledger, like saying, just that I want to set up now is, like under here, maybe setting up a main account for, say, my utilities, for my telephone all the way down through my water expense account. Sure, easy. Go over to my tree view. Again, in this case, all of the accounts, in this case for income and expenses, must be linked to the same fund. Okay? So if we click over under, say, our telephone or internet, I'm thinking most of those or all of those are probably going to be linked to my general operating fund. Sure, not a problem. So I can go over to my tree view, find my general operating fund and say add expense into general operating fund. I'm going to call this utilities expense, main expense. And we're going to number this one, how about 510-380. Whoops. And click OK. Same as we did with the new fund for missions. If I now click back over under my detail tab, I can find my telephone expense, add to ledger, main ledger, scroll down, choose main utilities main expense, click down under internet. Now notice my utilities main expense has a minus sign next to it. Can choose the next one, add to ledger, and the process starts over ad nauseum until I've moved the various utilities expenses to that new main ledger expense. This doesn't take very long at all, but it's knowing where to go about it and do it to take care of it, folks. And finally, one more for our water. And there we go. We've just set up a main utilities expense account and moved all of the current utilities as subledgers to that. Quick and simple and easy. Again, the reason why I can do that is my main utilities expense is linked to my general operating fund to add, and all of those other subledgers were all linked to the general operating fund as well. If I choose to go to remove those, if I go, okay, I don't want my account to be a subledger of another account, it doesn't matter whether it's a fund or not, I can simply highlight the account and click remove from ledger on the right. And that'll simply move that account out. So now my telephone is moved out of my main ledger utilities expense. All right, let's go over to subtotals now and talk about those. I really reserved those for the last on this webinar, primarily because they're the ones that probably you'll use most and yet are the most flexible. As we'd indicated earlier before, sub-accounts and sub-funds are really great, but as long as you're aware of the reporting restrictions and what the system will allow you to do with them, they work great. But frequently what I deal with a lot as a technician is users will set up sub-accounts, ledgers with sub-accounts when really subtotals are what they're wanting to work with. And how we access those are by going up to Manage Accounts and below that Subtotals. And this reveals our Subtotals window. Okay. There are 5 main subtotals: total assets, total liabilities, total fund balance, total income, and total expenses. There's always going to be 5 main level subtotals. Within those, we may have other internal subtotals. We basically can drill down 4 levels deep. So under, say, total expenses, I may have one called total salary and benefits. Within total salary and benefits, I may have one called total pastors and another one called total lay staff. And then even within the one called total pastors, I could set up one called total senior pastor, total associate pastor. Okay? Subtotals offer the greatest amount of reporting flexibility. Okay? Another good example of how that's different from main ledgers is if I go to my custom groups here at the top and I go, okay, I've got a mission grouping here and I want to go down to my expenses. I can't drill down and choose just one expense on a subledger. It says when adding a subledger, you must add the entire ledger. Just again, further example of how subledgers are a little more limiting than, in this case, subtotals. Okay. Subtotals are represented by the arrows, the little dark arrows here on the left. Whenever we add, say, a new subtotal, we're going to add one under assets. Click here. In this case, I'm saying I want to add one to my total assets, and we'll click Add New Subtotal. Notice now then in our subtotals window, it adds a new arrow with the word total, and our cursor is flashing up at the top right here, asking us to enter. Asking us to enter a new name. Sorry, folks, bear with me here. I need to make sure I'm adding the right type of accounts or subtotals here. Okay. So what am I asking here? What am I going to be adding? Add a new subtotal. So we're going to call this one total savings. It's as good as any. Total savings assets. So now then, whoops, I've added one unnecessarily. So I've highlighted the one down here. It has no accounts in it. Perfect time to delete that. So I've got total savings assets. So I've got a new subtotal. There are no accounts in it. So I would come down to the bottom here now and click on Show Accounts, and it now reveals the other accounts that I have that I can move. So here I can say, I'm going to pick up, I have 2 ways of moving accounts into my subtotals themselves. And that's one of 2 ways. I can either highlight the account, and then over here, let me get my highlighter, steer some focus. Once I've highlighted the account, I can move over to the right side here where it says Move Fifth Third Savings To. And then from the drop-down menu below that, I can choose the subtotal, and then right below that, click the Move Account button. Let's do it that way. So we're going to click the drop-down arrow, and we're going to choose Total Savings Assets, and click Move Account. And then notice here on the left-hand side, that account shifts down to, and they look like little sheets of paper, shifts down to the subtotal that I've requested it to move to. Okay. And let's maybe do the same thing for our, maybe National City Bank CD. Logic says that would be investments, but we'll move that account too just to show you how quick and easy it is. And the second way for us to be able to move accounts into subtotals is drag and drop. So rather than using the Move Account feature on the right side over here, we can simply pick up an account. Let's say we're going to move that Fifth Third Money Market account, and I'm going to pick it up, hold down my left mouse button, and drag it down. Notice the little yellow arrow on the left, and I'm going to drop it, hover right over the arrow called Total Savings Assets, and drop that, and that shifts that account. Either one of those options works for moving accounts into subtotals. I can move subtotals into other subtotals in much the same manner. In addition to that, I can also reorder my subtotals. So here under, say, maybe I don't want my total savings to appear at the very bottom. So I can go, okay, I'm going to highlight that and clicking on the right-hand side, these up and down arrows right here, right there. And I can use, once I've highlighted the subtotal, I can simply click the up arrow, and that now pushes up savings assets and puts fixed assets below that. I can move subtotals easily this way using these up and down arrows for subtotals that all fall at the same level. A more extensive look at that might be under, say, total expenses, where I've got a whole slew of level 3 subtotals here, where I go, oh, I don't want the total utilities to show up. I want it to appear below properties and building. Or I want to reorder these entirely. So I can highlight the total utilities, push down arrow, and it puts it below property and building. Maybe I want my total administration to be above both of those, but below salary and benefits. So again, highlighting the one and moving it up to total admin. Now that's not necessarily the true for some of these others, like under salaries and benefits, okay? These other subtotals, like here, total pastor salary and benefits. Yeah, I can move that total pastor salary and benefits either out of the subtotal called total salaries and benefits, again by simply picking it up and dropping it onto total expenses. So notice that I've moved that out of that subtotal, main subtotal called total salaries and benefits. I go, whoops, that's a mistake. I shouldn't have done that. I need to leave total pastor's salary and benefits inside or within the total salaries and benefits. Easy fix. I can either highlight it and pick it up and drag it and drop it on top of the arrow again, or I can highlight it and over here on the right move total pastors, basically move the subtotal to, and if I scroll down I can just choose total salaries and benefits, and notice the button now says move subtotal. And boom, I've moved that subtotal back into the main subtotal. The subtotals, again, folks, offers the greatest amount of flexibility for you from both reporting and manipulation. Again, the subledgers and subaccounts really restricts us in terms of both a reporting perspective, a reporting aspect, and for, in this case, being able to move things around. You know, the subtotals offer the greatest amount of flexibility. In addition to that, I can also create header text right up here to introduce the kinds of accounts I'm looking at on the report. Granted, subtotals and subledgers do that too, but naturally. Really, the subtotals themselves really just simply make reports far more interesting to read. You know, if we didn't have the ability to be able to create subtotals here, folks, and break up our accounts, we'd be looking at just a boring list of accounts. Okay, so not only does it help our readers to total up their accounts, particularly within their groupings, you know, or for particular committees or groups of folks or funds, it certainly makes the reports more interesting to read. So when we go up to reports, say, and like say balance sheet, if we go to print on that, let me get rid of my drawing tools here, erase my drawings. Things like our current assets and investments and total assets, savings assets and fixed assets, all of these are internal subtotals. Notice here under our like asset accounts, current assets and fixed assets, there's header text there that I didn't add to my total savings. The other thing about subtotals primarily that we have to always keep in mind, again, and we don't have really this capability so much with subaccounts, is when we go to reports here, like if we click on our, let's get rid of the drawing tools again, drawing. So if we click on the detail, I can ask the system just to display my subtotals if I wish. So if I go, okay, I just want to look at my balance sheet with simply my subtotals with no accounts, I can just uncheck the detail, click print, and boom, there's my balance sheet with just my subtotals or groupings of accounts with no specific accounts at all. I can do something similar, or the same exact thing with my treasurer's report. All right, so again, here's further example of how subtotals offers us a greater level of reporting flexibility that maybe subaccounts and subfunds, subledgers do not. Here again, I've got on my treasurer's report a detail tab that if I don't want to see one particular subtotal or a grouping of an account, we get this question a lot. Oh, I don't want my committees or people to see what my employees' salaries or compensation packages are, okay, or how much they're getting paid. Makes sense. Under salaries and benefits, I can just uncheck total salaries and benefits. it'll remove all of the other accounts below that automatically. And now when I click on print, we'll see a grouping or a total for our salaries and benefits expenses, but none of the actual specific accounts. So here's my salaries and benefits, pastor salaries, and here's just basically all of my compensation, but nobody knows how much the senior pastor is making versus the associate pastor. You can really drill down and make the detail for your reports pretty much as detailed as you want. I can do it for all of them if I wish. So if simply I just collapse everything down and just remove the check marks from total income and total expense, all I will see then are my subtotals with no specific accounts themselves. I have a lot of churches that I work with who love their treasurer's report just like this. Look at this. It's a simple 2-page report, provides virtually all of the same information that I would see if I saw the specific accounts, just none of the account detail and the clutter that may just offer more confusion for our folks than anything else. Subtotals are really, really flexible. We try to encourage folks to really think subtotals first rather than subaccounts and subledgers, subfunds. Doesn't mean it can't be changed. It just requires a little more work, okay? And we just have to remove them from ledger, and then we have to go in and design and build our subtotals. So if you think that you're in that position, please give us a call. We're happy to help you and walk you through it. Probably need a look at what you got and what you're working with, but quick 10-minute call with me. I can walk you through removing your accounts from your ledgers and walk through setting up some basic subtotals with you. Just keep in mind that the main subtotals of total, say, income, total expenses, all of these main total assets, liabilities, fund balances, income, and expenses are pre-constructed in church windows for you. Those should be left alone. But then within that, you can have virtually any number of subtotals within that you wish. I know that that's probably already been made clear on the with the questions that have been asked or that you folks have been asking is, sometimes the answers to your questions, folks, really requires a call to us so we get a better idea of what you're dealing with and what you're looking at, okay? The subtotals, I'm going to reiterate it again, offer the greatest level of or amount of flexibility for manipulating the data as well as your reports themselves. So we're about 4 minutes before the hour, folks. I'm pretty much done with what I had just decided or planned to discuss today. Thank you very much to Marla and Maureen for helping today. They've sort of been helping to point me in the right direction for what we really need to make sure that we're covering. Now again, it's the reporting again is always sort of the final step of all of that. But take a look at your reports. If you're not getting what you want on your reports and you're thinking it may have to do with how your subtotals versus subaccounts or vice versa are structured, please give us a call. Our support staff are always delighted and happy to help. All right. Yeah, there's a lot of folks that are unaware completely that you can go into your reports, financial balance sheet or the treasurer's report, either one of those options, and simply click on the detail tab and just reveal the subtotals of your accounts and none of the accounts themselves. That's a 1.5 page report instead of, say, a report where I've got all of my income and expenses and it's a 6-page report. You can pick and choose what detail of accounts you want to see and which ones you can't, which ones you don't. All right, so we're going to stick around and answer some more questions, but folks, it's like 3 minutes to the hour of 3 o'clock. We hope it's been helpful. I'm done talking with talking about what I had planned to discuss today. But we're going to be happy to stick around. If you you need to get on and get out to a meeting or something, please do so. Click the File menu at the top of your control pane and choose Exit or Leave Webinar. And And thank you so much for attending. I hope it was helpful. Let us know if you're unable to find the information in the help topics that we've covered today. But we'll be having other webinars like this in future, and we hope to see you there. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and continue to see what we can't do to get some of your questions answered. And thank you so much.